Welcome to the M&A Unplugged podcast. Our mission is to help you be better prepared for your business acquisition or sale. Being prepared will ensure you maximize returns and minimize risks. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
Intuition is considered a form of knowledge that reveals itself in our consciousness absent the more formal methods of deliberation. I read somewhere recently that intuition is not magical, but rather a faculty in which hunches are generated by the unconscious mind, rapidly sifting through past experiences and cumulative knowledge. Often referred to as gut feelings, intuition tends to arise holistically and quickly, without awareness of the underlying mental processing of information. I know for me, when I trust and listen to my intuition during deals and other areas of my life, it has always served me well. Dean Newlund is a student of intuition, a topic he speaks and writes about extensively. He is the CEO of Mission Facilitators International, a training and development firm that has helped leaders, teams, and organizations reach their potential through executive coaching, training, strategic planning, and transforming company culture. They work with the medium to large organizations nationally and worldwide. Dean recently launched his own podcast, The Business of Intuition. And last year, he spoke about intuition at a TEDx event in Bend, Oregon. Dean, welcome to M&A Unplugged. And I'm looking forward to helping our audience understand how intuition can help them during their M&A transactions.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Dean, maybe start off with a little bit more about your background and how did you get to the topic of intuition being something that, appears to be your life's mission?
Well, it didn't happen all at once. It seems to have built up over time. I think that partly came through my upbringing, my family, and, the message around the dinner table was, follow your gut. What is it you really feel? When I went through graduate school, actually, I got a degree in acting. And in that particular period of my life, there was so much about your own self-awareness and being able to understand the motivations of yourself and other people. And then when I started this company, Mission Facilitators International, it just seemed to be not a typical fit, but a very good fit in terms of coaching and training. And I know that at one point, it really struck me that there was something to this intuition. I remember distinctly having this decision to either stay in Minneapolis and continue to be around family after a divorce and deciding to quit a job. And then there was this voice in me that said I needed to move to Seattle, Washington. And it didn't really quite make a lot of sense. I even had family members say, "What, are you crazy? Like that? Why would you want to go to Seattle where you don't have any support? You have no business prospects other than this idea to start this new company. Why not stay where you have family and friends and resources?" And I went, "I know, it makes no sense." And I remember having this conversation with my dad, and I said, "I get it, Daddy. I know you're probably freaking out about your son just sort of up and running out and going into Seattle." But the timing was really important because when I finally landed in Seattle and started getting myself acclimated, I ended up meeting, which later became my wife, and we become fast friends and soulmates, so to speak. And that's when the business really started to take off. So there was this sense of I had a feeling that I needed to do this, and it didn't make any sense at the time, but boy, am I glad I did it. And there's been several times when big decisions didn't at first have any data to support it that later I realized were the right ones. And so when the topic of doing a TED Talk came up, I thought this is something that I think is useful, not as a woo-woo, but as an actual, I would almost call it a superpower, if you will, that we all have, that we just may not always trust and have the courage to use. And I see this all the times in boardrooms and with CEOs, that the people often are not asked to participate because they're not subject matter experts. But when you actually open up that engagement to include hunches, you actually have more creative, innovative, and engaged business people when they are allowed that space to go on hunch and to talk from that perspective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I have learned to really rely on my intuition and gut feeling. And when I don't is when I get myself into trouble.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. You reference maybe everybody having intuition. Does everybody have intuition? I mean, are there people that just maybe don't have it and they're not connected with it? Or does everybody have intuition?
Well, everybody has, a left hand and a right hand, unless of course you've been born without one, but your normal makeup as a human being does allow you to access your intuition. And it may not mean that your style and your preference is to go there, but
Yeah.
I do believe from a real basic neurological perspective, we all have a right side of the brain. In very basic terms, that's the more creative, innovative, intuitive side, where the left side is more analytical and data focused. So yes, we all have intuition. Do we all have the familiarity with it? Do we listen to it? No. But is it there as a tool? Yes.
Yeah. Is intuition something that can be developed? Is it like a skill that, another type of skill that we all have that you can develop it and hone it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of things that can get in the way of us being intuitive. But the way that I believe that we can increase that trust and work that muscle is to do a few things just to be able to tap into that. And one of them is to be present, is really just to kind of get yourself into a state of not going into what's going on in the future, what's going on in the past, but bringing the mind to the present and bringing yourself back into your body, so to speak. Because the interesting thing about intuition is it doesn't have a language. Data, facts, and information have language, but intuition doesn't have a language. It has a feeling. And that's why I think sometimes it's hard to access it. But being present is one way we can get ourselves to access that part of ourselves that is called intuition.
So do you have an example that you can point to? I mean, maybe you have several of intuition. I mean, do you have an example of intuition, maybe from yourself or you've experienced it?
Well, yeah, in our coaching with executives, you'll sit down and you'll talk and they'll want to get into all the things that are going on. Let's say there's an employee issue, or there's a strategy issue, or there's a board member issue. And we can talk around the topic for a long period of time. But then sometimes we'll just simply say, well, what does your gut say about this? What do you really know about this? Mm-hmm. And it's such a ubiquitous part of what we do that oftentimes people need to have their facts and information justify what they already know. And once you allow them to sort of see the connection, then the intuitive side starts to take on a greater part of their decision making. Listen, I'm not saying that we should not be data-based. We should. I mean, we have to make really sound decisions, and businesses are run on facts and information and spreadsheets and scorecards. And that's fine. That is the language of business. The language of business is not intuition. But I believe that it can include intuition as a way to be able to make us more innovative, more creative, engage more people in discussions. And quite frankly, it's like if you were out to buy a brand new car and you found out that you were only using 2 cylinders out of 8, you might go, well, I like to use the other 6. So intuition is the other 6. There's just more information and pattern recognition and opportunities than I believe we sometimes give ourselves the chance to access.
So, Dean, let me ask this. How can you tell intuition apart from maybe your personal agenda? Like, so you've set in your mind that you want something to happen. And how do you know that it's not your personal agenda taking over your decision-making versus it's truly your intuition?
That's a great question. The agenda could very well be just your ego, and your ego often is playing a role to keep you in some sort of control over, your perspective, your desires, your wants, and your needs. I think intuition, when it is really tuned in and you're tapped into it, overrides that. And again, it is going to be a certain enough feeling that might come about in some people feel it in their gut, quite frankly.
Yeah.
They might feel it in some sort of sense of knowing. And it
Yeah.
usually, intuition is sort of akin to a certain kind of truth. And I heard somebody describe this to me a couple of days ago, that when you are tapped into truth, whatever that is, there is a sense of release.
Yeah.
There is a feeling of slight calm that comes over you. Doesn't mean the outside world changes. You still may have whatever issues you have, but you've now tapped into what is really the truth of the matter. And intuition is that feeling that I'm now on the tip of the pin of the needle. This is where it really should be. And then once we get to that, all the sorts of other things start to open up.
It's interesting because in my world where we help people buy and sell businesses, I see this happen a lot with buyers, for example, where the facts are such that maybe they should be, going forward with the process, right? And they defy all odds, and they ignore their intuition. Like, they move forward in spite of probably what their gut is telling them.
Right.
And so why does that happen? I mean, why, does that mean somebody's just not in tune with their intuition?
When they override it?
Yeah.
Well, we're creatures of habit, and we're creatures of comfort, and change is not easy. The brain is set up to that. It wants to stay to a certain degree in a stasis mind set, and we want to have things be consistent. If your intuition is giving you information that you need to change, and your mental data-based side of your personality says, I don't want to change, I'm scared, or this feels too risky, that's where you have this disjointed parts of yourself battle it out, right? Yeah. Am I going to pay attention?
And how does that manifest itself? So how do you, when you're battling, what are you typically doing in that point? Are you indecisive? Like how does that manifest itself when that battle occurs?
Well, this is a personal story, and I will just tell you that I was married once before. And you kind of wanted an example. I probably should have given you a business example, but here's a personal example. So I had actually fell in love with this gal right out of college. And long story short, that there were plans for marriage. And I remember walking down some sort of alleyway right before the wedding was going to take place. We were doing it outside. And every part of me said, this doesn't feel right. I don't know what's going on here, but this didn't feel like the right thing to do. And I have to tell you, in all honesty, I knew much earlier on that it was the wrong thing to do. Yeah. But I kept putting it off. I wanted to please her. I wanted to please her mother. I wanted to please my parents. I had grandparents that flew out to do this. There was a lot of pressure to do what it was that I said I was going to do. And so I'm a guy that follows through with things, right? If I make a commitment, I'm going to do it. And sometimes I make commitments that even are against my intuition because I said I was going to do it, right? Yeah. So my values around commitment was going in counter to my intuition.
That's a great example.
And so I think that's really hard because we value to serve people. We value to get work done. We value to make money for our families. We do all these things because of our values, but our intuition sometimes says, but in this case, if you go down that path, you might make a wrong decision. And that's what happened with me. And I remember, once the marriage happened, it was very, very clear within a matter of days that it was not the right thing to do. And we probably lasted for about another year. And everybody in my family and friends said, we knew this was the wrong thing. And I'm thinking like, well, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah. Why didn't you stand up during the service?
Yeah. So
I've heard this same example at least a dozen times from other people. maybe even more. I'm probably not
Yeah.
counting all the times I've heard it, but that example is an interesting one. I think in a business context, I think probably people protecting their calendars is another one, right? You accept meetings, or you commit to something that you probably know you shouldn't be committing to, some meeting or event or some speaking engagement. Your intuition is telling you not to, but for some other reason, you feel a commitment to go do those things.
It's a great line of questioning because we don't want conflict. We don't want to disappoint people.
Mhm.
And if we were to really tap into that intuitive voice, would we be accepting those calendar notices? Would we be taking on these extra projects? Would we hire that person
Yeah.
because your boss told you that you should, but even though you shouldn't? Would we be buying this business? Would we be getting involved with this particular person in a marriage? All these things are presented to us, and we want to serve and want to be the good person.
Yeah.
And yet we might be going against what we know to be true. And I really think that if we are actually more intuitive, we're going to make much better decisions. We're going to be serving ourselves better, but by virtue of doing that, we will serve other people much, much better.
Yeah.
So we get ourselves, and then we feel guilty about it. And, we realize, God, I was so stupid. Why did I do this?
Right.
And then we just try harder to do more of the same the next time versus like, wait a minute, the lesson to learn here was you knew a long time ago that you shouldn't have done this. And yet you keep going back and doing the same pattern over and over again. So then it becomes almost like a behavioral addiction. We just sort of like, this is how we do things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Normal.
Makes perfect sense. So Dean, let's because this is a show that's focused on mergers and acquisitions, and
let's talk about it. Yeah.
Buyers and sellers and professionals that, help people buy and sell businesses. How can you take this knowledge and this concept of intuition into the mergers and acquisitions world when people are faced with, making big financial decisions? And sometimes it is, and many times it actually is, the largest financial decision that somebody will make in their lifetime. What role can intuition play as they contemplate buying or selling businesses? And even advisors as they're advising their clients?
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about first the seller. And it was something that you told me when I had interviewed you in my podcast, The Business of Intuition, just yesterday. And I think that you had mentioned that 75%, tell me if I'm wrong here, of the people that sell their businesses feel some sort of remorse. Is that right?
That's true. And let me put some context to that.
Yeah.
So this was from an independent study that I didn't see the results to, but it was presented to me at a conference. And the results of this straw poll were 75% of owners were remorseful, not about the money, the amount of money or the consideration they were paid for the business, but more around what they did or weren't doing after the sale. They didn't have the next thing. And so they felt sort of lost after the sale of the business.
Got it. Okay. So if that's the case, then I want to just use that as the example of a person who has sold a business, maybe made some good money in the process, but later has that remorse that you just talked about.
Yeah.
My sense is that if they were really tuned into themselves during that whole process of selling, that they probably had little indications that there was something that they weren't paying attention to, that remorse was already beginning to happen prior to the sale. That we already knew somewhere, if we really were paying attention, that I haven't really answered the question, what am I going to do after I sell this business?
Mm-hmm.
That sense of loss, that relationship, that identity. So my sense is, and I don't, know the people that you work with per se, but the concept around feeling a remorse after something has happened, my sense is they probably had some clues that was going to be the case long before that happened.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean in terms of how does this affect people in buying and selling businesses? I love your process. I mean, I'm talking to you yesterday and going through your website and seeing the questionnaires that you have and the ebooks and all the stuff that you have. Unbelievable. I mean, I'm really very deeply impressed by how well you've been able to lay out a process for people for buying and selling. No, just tremendous. And I'm really going to refer people to you. And I think what you do is just spot on. How does intuition add into this? I really think that if people are not just going through your steps, which they should, is to keep checking in with themselves. How does this feel? Does this seem right? Don't get into the numbers, let go of that spreadsheet, but how does it feel to be contemplating to buy this business? Like, I've bought real estate before in the past, not businesses, but apartments and houses and so forth. And there were times when I bought something and I went, yeah, it makes perfect sense on paper. There's a good ROI. The payback period is perfect, but something doesn't feel right. And the times that I have actually bought those businesses, I paid for it later, sometimes not necessarily financially, but through the amount of time and work and heartache that it caused me. So I think that, again, not to discount what this data-based perspective and process is all about. It's so important. It's just to say, don't just use that. Is there something about your pattern recognition that intuition helps you see? Is there something that just doesn't feel right? Look into those areas. And if you have a sense of peace and it feels right, then go with it. And then your data, your facts, your process all backs that up.
Right. And I guess that, the same message really applies to buyers, right? Even though we spoke about sellers, it's, we talk a lot about motivation, and I was trying to connect the dots to see if motivation is the same as it, but it's not. You may be motivated, but your intuition could be still telling you something different. And so motivation really is motivation to buy or sell a business. The motivation could be there, but if your intuition is telling you this isn't the right situation or the right buyer or the right business to buy, you have to follow that. So you could still be motivated, but your intuition could be telling you something different.
Absolutely. And again, a bad analogy, but I was at the ophthalmologist not that long ago, and you go through those little eye tests where you say, okay, and I have contacts. And so put your right hand over your left eye and so on and so forth. And can you read the numbers on the back of the wall, right? Well, of course, when you put all of your contacts out and your normal glasses out, you can't read much. You can maybe see the top line. Yeah. And in some ways, your analytical side can see certain things and do it very, very well. You can see the big numbers. What intuition does is it starts to help you pick up patterns and information that the conscious mind can't always see. So there's more to look into. There's a greater view than what you had before. I can now see the small numbers on the bottom of the page, not just the top. Yeah. So all of them are important, but they just access you in different ways. One through very analytical thinking and language, and the other one more through your body and through your gut.
Yeah. Dean, I'm fascinated by what you do. I think it's an untapped resource that not enough of us are in touch with. And I've learned to be more in touch with it as I've gotten older. I've got the scars to show where I didn't pay attention. So hopefully if you get enough scars, you start paying attention to your intuition. And in fact, it's so interesting. About 6 months ago, I met somebody in a coaching environment who specifically talked about intuition to us. So I think you're really on to something. Tell our audience just a little bit more about how you approach clients, some of the things that you offer and can do for people to help them. And it sounds like, not only be a better owner, manager, leader, but build a better culture. It sounds like, it permeates, this concept really permeates an organization.
Yeah, it really does. And our name is Mission Facilitators International. So the word mission is very, very important. Not mission from a religious perspective, but from what is our purpose? What are we here to do as a company? What is our highest and best service to each other, our stakeholders, our shareholders, and the community as large? And so I think that's extremely important. And there was an interesting book that's coming out in the next few months that talks about purpose mindset versus a growth mindset. And I think we've been in a growth mindset for a while, and I'm certainly fine with that, but that's more about how do we get more products out to the market. A purpose mindset is more like, how do we serve the market? How do we serve each other? It's almost like a triple bottom line scorecard concept. How do we make sure that the community, as well as the employees, as well as the stakeholders and the shareholders are served? So have a more holistic, perspective. So we're really focused on mission, on purpose, and we make sure that everything we do kind of lines up with that, whether it's working with executives and helping them become high performers, whether we're onboarding a new person into a company, whether we're working with boards of directors, strategic planning, training development, and large-scale culture change work. It's really focused on maximizing the human potential through work. I think that because we spend so much of our time at work, even though now it's virtual, right? It is the biggest social arena for change that we have in most cases. And sometimes more so than our families, sometimes more so than our churches and so forth. It's because we spend so much time there. There's so much happening at work. And if we can master this thing called work and the interactions with human beings in this thing called work, whether that be buying and selling businesses, whether it be writing code for Microsoft, we really have this ability to make some massive and wonderful changes to the overall society that in which we live. And so that's the kind of game that I want to play. I want to play about working with change agents and thought leaders and industry leaders who are certainly wanting to do the money and make the money that they need to. It is the lifeblood of what makes a business run, and so that it also creates this greater ripple effect and it changes the lives of the people that they touch.
That's great. That's tremendous. Dean, it's been such a pleasure to have you here today. I have to say, I've really, this has been a treat for me because I'm a naturally curious person. And I feel like, this whole exploration, just my prep for the interview around intuition, took me to a different place. And I feel like I've learned something new. And every day when you're learning something new is a great day. Dean, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how could they reach you?
Well, website is MFI Leadership. So Mary Frank Igloo Leadership, MFI Leadership. And then the podcast that you had mentioned earlier is called The Business of Intuition. And we have got just a plethora of people who are showing up on that. And thank you so much for being my guest yesterday. I've had CEOs that have come on. I've got scientists. I've had authors. I've had doctors, naturopaths. We've even had a few artists, and all of them coming at this perspective around intuition from different lenses and the just phenomenal sort of stuff that's coming out of it. And really, I'm trying to get intuition out of the closet and into the boardroom.
Yeah.
I want this to be something that we don't feel like it's just sort of like this thing you do that's so woo-woo. No, this isn't real scientific. There's books, there's literature on this. There was something I read from a journal somewhere that, the higher up you go in an organization, the more intuitive you become, or you should become. And that there's data that says that intuitive leaders actually make better decisions, which then produce better ROI for their stakeholders. I mean, it's out there, and I want to be one of those people that gets the word out.
Well, I'm glad you're pursuing that. I believe in it, and I know when I haven't followed my intuition that it's always left a scar. So, thanks again for being on. Really appreciate it.
Hey, you bet. Thank you so much for having me.
M&A Unplugged community. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about the process of acquiring or selling a business, take our free buyer or seller assessments at K2 Advisor. That's K, the number 2, ADVISER.com. These assessments will tell you how ready you really are for a potential sale or acquisition. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.